All right, guys, welcome to the show. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So we have today, we're going to show Cenk went on NewsNation and followed in the footsteps of Crystal. Crystal, of course, embarrassed Leland Vittert in a debate about Israel and Palestine. Now it's going to be Cenk versus Dan Abrams, and this comes on the heels of Hassan Piker went on Piers Morgan's show and debated the issue of Israel-Palestine. So we're getting many Israel-Palestine debates happening right now. We're going to dive into that. We also have some new leaked audio of the Australian billionaire who said that Trump has basically been giving away national secrets from classified documents like nothing. We'll dive into that. And then we also have Trump runs an anti-Hillary Clinton ad like we're in the year 2016. That's adorable. Liz Cheney floats a potential presidential run. And later on in the show, we're going to get to who remains to potentially be the next Speaker of the House, who's throwing their hat into the ring, and all that fun stuff. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and dive into it here. And you guys know the drill. Everybody do me a big favor. Please click like, click subscribe. We're trying to continue to grow the community. And remember, you could always support the show on Patreon, link below, or you could tip on YouTube with the thanks button. Or you could support Crystal, Kyle, and friends. All that is deeply appreciated. I've never had a conversation with an advertiser. You guys helped build the show from the ground up, and I deeply, deeply appreciate it. All right, so here we go. So Dan Abrams had on Cenk to discuss what's currently going on in Israel and Gaza. And as these debates usually go, they got really, really heated. So the other day on NewsNation, we covered Crystal went on Leland Vittert's show. That did not go very well for Leland. So now Dan Abrams is going to do his version of that. He brought on Cenk to discuss the war. Let's see how that goes.
Liberal firebrand Cenk Uygur. He's the founder and host of the Young Turks. He's also running for the Democratic presidential nomination in 2024 now. Cenk, thanks very much for coming on the program. Appreciate it. All right, so what do you think I or Brian Stelter am getting wrong?
Yeah, a lot. Sorry, but that's my take on it. So first of all, I think, number one, when you don't allow journalists into an area, that's kind of on you. So I'm not going to take anyone's word for it when they don't allow journalists into the area. And Israel has already killed a number of journalists, including a Reuters journalist. And I'm sure that every killing is, of course, an accident, including when they bombed a bus full of people. 70 people died, I believe, on that convoy that they had asked them to leave. The UN has said that they bombed schools, etc. So you've got one incident where it is not
Let's not do a hit and run. Let's not do a hit and run here. Let's take a little bit about what you just said. First of all, the 70, there is a huge dispute about what happened there, and that it may have not been Israel at all.
It's never Israel.
No, I know. You never want to believe. I know. It's not possible. I know it's not possible that it would be the terrorists. I get it. That they're trying to prevent people from going south. It's not possible.
Oh my God, this is so Weasley from Dan Abrams because he acts like, oh, well, Israel obviously cares about civilian casualties, and Hamas doesn't. But Dan, Israel is open about the fact that they're doing a medieval-style siege against Gaza. And they're preventing the entire civilian population, over 2.2 million people, they're preventing them from getting food and water and fuel. You have some people drinking seawater to stay alive. You have some hospital workers drinking IV fluid bags. So they weren't exactly subtle about the fact that they don't view Gazan civilians as civilians. The Israeli president said, they're not civilians. We don't view them as civilians. They could have done a coup to take out Hamas. They didn't. They're culpable, in our opinion. You had them calling them human animals. But now, all of a sudden, when it's convenient, it's like, what? You're going to contest every little individual event? When we already know there's no dispute Israel bombed that church the other day. There's no dispute they've been leveling residential apartment buildings. Now then they turn around and say, well, in every single instance, there were Hamas rockets inside or Hamas fighters inside. This is what they do. But guess what? We have history where we can judge here. So in 2014, they did Operation Protective Edge. The low number of civilians, they said, was 63% civilian deaths. The high number was 80%. So no matter how you slice it or dice it, a majority of the people they killed were civilians. And now he's being weaselly and acting like, well, any individual instance you bring up, I'm going to say it's actually Hamas that did that bombing. It's unbelievable.
It could be the occupiers, right?
No, it is possible. Of course it's possible. It's possible to be Israel. But I would think, Cenk, you'd care about evidence. And you made the point that they don't have anyone on the ground. So satellite images, nope, can't use it. Surveillance, can't use it. None of it is valid, right? Nothing.
No. So let me be clear. And thank you for asking for the clarification. So on the hospital, it is now in doubt. And the U.S. intelligence has not reached a firm conclusion. But I understand the evidence that you presented, and it is entirely possible that in this case that it was not the IDF. So I'm not arguing that case. What I'm arguing is Israel here has already killed about 3,000 civilians.
Wait, hang on. Hold on. No, I got to ask you about that. Where are you getting that number from? You're getting it from Hamas. Where's that number coming from?
Oh, my God. So Israel doesn't allow journalists into Gaza. And so any numbers that you get are going to come from, I think it's called like the Gaza Health Ministry or something like that, which is in some ways connected to Hamas because Hamas is the governing authority in Gaza. So any sort of official Gaza government body is going to be connected to Hamas. But then we get numbers and they turn around and go, you can't believe that, that's Hamas. But, I mean, like, we want to allow in independent third-party journalists to verify all this stuff, but Israel won't let us do it. So then it's like, well, whose word are we going to take? Well, you could take in the Gaza Health Ministry, or you could, whatever UN workers or Amnesty International workers or whatever on the ground, you could take their word for it. That's all we got. And he's protesting, so, like, what, you're literally not allowed to mention any number because Israel doesn't allow in journalists? The thing is, even if you cut their number in half, let's say, you know, they exaggerate it and they double it. Well, you still have, right now, 2,000 civilians who were killed by Israel and over 500 children. And that's, again, if we cut the numbers in half. So it's like nuanced trolling, right? Like, oh, you're going to believe that? Well, we would like it if Israel let in independent journalists, but they don't. So what are we going to do? Yeah, I'm going to rely on the UN workers and the Amnesty workers. And yes, you can look at the evidence presented by the Gaza Health Ministry. Jesus Christ. And he acts like, you just believe Hamas, willy-nilly. You could easily flip all this right back on Dan Abrams because he believes whatever the IDF tells him, even when the IDF is caught in a blatant, disgusting lie. He probably believed the IDF when they brought up Shireen Abu Akleh. Oh, no, she was killed by Palestinians. The IDF lied about that relentlessly until they couldn't lie anymore. And then it was like, all right, fine, we killed her. That was a journalist who the IDF killed, murdered. And originally they were like, not us, not us, not us, not us, not us. Then eventually they were like, okay, well, it's on video. We can't really hide it anymore.
And everyone who has access to it, they are trying to confirm it. But Dan, what difference does it make if it's 2,900 or 3,000? Are you pretending that Israel isn't dropping massive bombs inside Gaza?
No, what I'm doing is saying
they haven't tried to move 1 million people. Are you pretending that they're not bombing the living crap out of Gaza right now?
Not yet.
Because please don't pretend that.
They're about to, but they've begun. You're right. There's no doubt that there have been civilian deaths in Gaza. But the notion that you're already relying 3,000 deaths, that comes from Hamas. These are the same people who said 500 died in a hospital. And you just accept these numbers and you repeat them without questioning them. And that's my problem.
Dan, No, Dan, the number one problem in media in my lifetime has been the exact opposite of what you and Brian said. They almost always take the government position as if it's true. I've seen it happen 200 times, both in the case of America and Israel. And almost every time the government is lying. But the rebuttable presumption, Dan, is on the aggressor. So when Hamas attacked Israel, they don't get to complain about propaganda. And so in this case, Israel is the aggressor.
Wait. That was a good response. I think the better response would have been Protective Edge in 2014. Basically, the numbers that we got from the Palestinian officials matched up with what the UN verified after the fact and what international agencies verified after the fact. So it was like there was no lying about it. The lying would have been caught. But we verified the numbers were actually true. So in this instance, there's no reason not to take the numbers as they've been presented, especially with all the evidence that's presented along with it. So it's just, again, it's nuanced trolling. It's you believe Hamas. If you look at the gargantuan mountains and mountains of evidence that have come out, videos, pictures, firsthand accounts, etc., of the residential apartment buildings being bombed, a mosque being bombed, hospitals being bombed, schools being bombed. I mean, the UN says, like, what was it, over 20, I think it was like 29 teachers of theirs have been killed, bombed by Israel. So, like, is everybody making all of it up? Well, according to Dan Abrams, maybe. And if you disagree, you're just falling for Hamas propaganda.
It's Gaza.
Wait.
And so now they say,
why is Israel already...
Wait, wait a couple of weeks before you criticize me.
Right, Israel's already the aggressor, right? It's already to the point where Hamas attacked Israel, and now Israel's preparing its response, and it's already the aggressor, and the presumption is anything bad that happens in Gaza must be Israel. That's the presumption, correct?
Well, after you announce a medieval siege where you take 2.3 million civilians and you say, you're all guilty, we're going to do collective punishment, yes, at that moment, you're the aggressor. And I understand Cenk's point. You're the aggressor in the sense that you're the occupier. You're doing apartheid. You're the ones who keep Palestinians in a permanent police state with no human rights, no political rights, etc. Like, yeah, you're an aggressor in that respect. It's also the case that Hamas was the aggressor when they killed innocent civilians on October 7th. Every reasonable person agrees to that. Those civilians are off limits, completely off limits. They should be off limits. That's the whole point of international law and being a humanitarian, is we don't go after civilians. But they responded to the wanton violence against civilians by doing wanton violence against civilians, doing collective punishment. Yeah, anybody who's doing attacks against civilians are the aggressor by definition. And that applies to Hamas when they do that, and that applies to the IDF when they do it, and they're doing it right now.
Dan, Hamas started this, no question. What they did was barbaric, no question.
But
Israel has a right to go and try to get those hostages. So far, they've done zero of that, none. Instead, they've dropped bombs that might kill the hostages. We got American hostages there. Stop dropping bombs. Second of all, Dan, as a government, you have a higher responsibility, especially a government pretending to be a democracy. You have a much higher responsibility than Hamas, a terrorist group.
That's true.
So yes, you're supposed to take care to not kill civilians.
Yeah.
And when it looks like you've killed about twice as many as Hamas did, that's the time where you start to look in the mirror and go, am I doing the right thing here? Or am I being equally barbaric?
And then you ask yourself the other question, which is, where would I possibly accept those numbers from? The notion that there's somehow 3,000 civilians. I promise you, any Hamas number is going to include fighters and civilians together. I won't even begin to accept those numbers. I don't even know if it's 300. I don't know if it's 3,000. It's Hamas numbers. They mean nothing.
That's such a Weasley point. Again, we have history we could look at, and we could rely on it as a judge for what's happening now. And in 2014, Operation Protective Edge, the numbers that were reported at the time and the numbers that were verified after the fact were relatively equal. And again, like I said, even if you cut the numbers in half, let's say for argument's sake, everything they say, cut it in half. Okay, so we have 2,000 dead civilians, and we have a little over 500 dead children. Right? Like the actual numbers they're saying are 4,000 and like 1,000. 4,000 civilians, 1,000 kids. Even if you cut that in half, is this not like you're splitting hairs over nothing, right? It's such a stunningly stupid point where it's just like you object to everything up front. No, I'm just not going to add. Well, what about we can see on social media the carnage and the devastation. We know based on what Israel is saying, what their response is, how devastating it is with the medieval siege. So how you can take issue and say, you're just buying into Hamas propaganda. That's just, it's so stunningly stupid. It's like they have nothing, so they rely on this. The dumbest argument imaginable.
So first of all, let me agree and disagree. So the part I agree with you is, are there some fighters in those numbers? I'm sure there are, right? And is Hamas fudging the numbers around the edges? I'm sure they are.
The edges.
But you have seen this in other conflicts, Dan, where then the United Nations and journalists go in afterwards, after Israel has bombed Gaza, and they come back and say the numbers were relatively accurate. And you have seen IDF lie over and over and over again. They're the boy who cried wolf. So now if there's an actual wolf, we go, well, I don't know. Is Hamas lying about this one? You said they were lying, the Palestinians were lying, and you were wrong 9 out of 10 times. I mean, they killed Shirin Abu Akleh, an American journalist, and they brazenly lied about it. So as a government, you have a responsibility to have some modicum of honesty so that we can believe you when you say things like this.
I agree with you.
You might actually be right.
By the way, I'm going to end this by saying on the area, I agree with you. Israel is held to a higher standard. Israel should be held to a higher standard. On that, I agree with you. I also think that they're held to a completely different standard than any other country, but that's a debate for another day. Cenk, thank you. Appreciate it.
That's such a Weasley point. That is so not true. They always try to make this point to deflect criticism where they're like, why are you singling Israel out? The same people who support BDS against Israel to try to bring about human rights, these are the same people, if you say, hey, should we sanction Saudi Arabia? They go, absolutely. The idea that like, oh, the whole world is uniquely unfair to Israel. Israel has the backing of the United States. We give them money. We give them weapons. We give them a green light to do whatever the hell they want. The most powerful military in human history that has ever existed gives Israel a green light to do whatever the hell they want. And they cry and they whine like, oh my God, we're being singled out. To the extent you are being singled out, number one, it's not unique. Number two, it is because you are doing permanent occupation and apartheid. And in Gaza, Palestinians have no human rights and political rights, and they live in a permanent police state. In the West Bank, you have illegal ultra-Orthodox Israeli settlers bulldozing Palestinian villages to the ground and casually stealing their land. So you get criticized on that front. Now, by the way, the criticism is usually through the UN General Assembly, not the Security Council, which means it's toothless. Nothing comes of it. The Security Council will need to condemn in order for anything to come of it, and they don't, because the U.S. uses our veto power for it. So it's such Weasley nonsense. And at the same time that you have Israel carrying out collective punishment, doing a medieval siege, bombing innocent people relentlessly, apartment buildings, etc., you have Dan Abrams going out there carrying water for the IDF and arguing, why would you believe Hamas numbers? Even if you cut those numbers in half, this is still an atrocity. And there's no reason you should cut those numbers in half, because the Israeli officials said, we are going to do collective punishment against these human animals. We don't think any of them are actually civilians. So why aren't you, Dan Abrams, screaming about protecting Palestinian civilians? Because you don't care about Palestinian civilians. That's obvious. So look, this didn't go well for Leland Vittert against Crystal, and this didn't go well for Dan Abrams against Cenk. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.